Ladies and gentlemen, it is truly an honor once again to be addressing the final round of the American Parliamentary Debate Association National Championships. Truly happy to be hitting good friends on side Dave, excellent partner. He's going to give you a great speech. The case we have decided to present today raises a lot of interesting issues, I think. First about science, which is something that I hold very, very dear to myself, and questions about the value of debate as an activity, the value of discourse. And it's opp-choice. So we're going to put you, the members of the audience, the members of the panel, we're going to say that you're an evolutionary biologist working at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. We're going to say that a prominent advocate of the theory of intelligent design has challenged you to a debate on that topic, evolution versus intelligent design. My question to side opposition is whether you as the professor ought to accept his challenge.
Are there any rules governing this debate, like what, when he says he challenged you to it, can you constrain him to any sort of rules in it?
I mean, conceivably it will be held in this beautiful auditorium, standing on stage. Maybe you can have some slides behind you.
So you said this is a scientist who's this, who's a...
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What's it? Debating.
Say debating. All right. We have three very important reasons why you ought to refuse his challenge. And the first crucial reason is that debating intelligent design legitimizes it as a theory. Intelligent design is not science, ladies and gentlemen. It is religious ideology watered down for mainstream consumption. We're going to posit two minimal criteria for a scientific theory. First, that it must be empirically testable. And secondly, that it makes some predictions about the world which can be observed and tested. And secondly, that it must be falsifiable. Namely, there must be an experiment which could possibly show the theory to be wrong. Intelligent design satisfies neither of those criteria. Intelligent design states basically that some biological entities are so complex that they must have been specifically created by a supernatural being. This act of creation is neither observable nor reproducible. It's just something we're supposed to accept on faith. As, by definition, this supernatural creator falls outside of the bounds of the natural world, his existence can obviously never be proven, thus removing all empiricism from the theory. Secondly, intelligent design is not falsifiable. It rests on a God in the gaps hypothesis that there are some things in evolutionary history that we don't understand, therefore God must be responsible. As our knowledge of evolution and biology increases, we can explain more and more of the natural world. However, as we'll never develop as humans absolute knowledge, we can never truly get sort of God out of the picture. Therefore, in the eyes of intelligent design supporters, we can never disprove intelligent design because there are always some questions that science will never be able to answer. Therefore, intelligent design is not falsifiable. By debating them, by doing what side opposition has proposed, you are therefore committing the fallacy of false equivalence. Even though intelligent design is pseudoscience, by showing up to debate, you give the impression that the other side is worth talking about. You give the impression that intelligent design has some valid points to make that you ought engage in a forum like this. Instead, we say you ought show that there is no debate to be had and that intelligent design theory is, pardon my French, a bunch of BS. Furthermore, the act of debating, and this is particularly important, buys into the intelligent design activists' propaganda for putting intelligent design into schools. They argue that we ought to teach the controversy. Now, in the scientific community, ladies and gentlemen, there is no controversy. There are 150 years, tens of thousands of researchers who have crafted a dynamic and realistic theory of evolution that explains life on this planet. By debating intelligent design advocate, you're giving a platform to an anti-science position, and you're giving the speaker much more credibility than he deserves. Sure.
All of the arguments in your first point about the problems with intelligent design, wouldn't they be better presented in like a debate than just forcing the people that know the debate doesn't happen?
Beautiful. The second point I'd like to talk to you about is the correct form for scientific debate, because scientific debate takes place in peer-reviewed journals where evidence can be presented, reproduced, and critiqued, and other scientists can test the claims that one makes. Science is not well suited to standing up in front of an audience and giving an 8-minute long rant on whatever topic pleases your fancy. As much as we like to do that, that doesn't serve science well. Furthermore, standing on stage, you cannot reproduce real evidence to actually refute the claims the intelligent design advocate is making. Should the intelligent design advocate make a ludicrous claim, like the so-called fossil record has gaps in it that can't be explained by evolution, standing on stage in front of a podium, there's no way to refute that claim. You can't procure the evidence necessary to do so. So, by refusing to debate the intelligent design advocate, you send the right message. You say, look, there are correct ways for getting a radical new theory accepted. That is to go out, formulate a hypothesis, collect evidence, write it up, and then publish. It isn't right for an intelligent design advocate to propose a radical new theory and then go around trying to make scientists waste their time refuting it. The third point that I would like to make is quite simply what I call getting the 24-4, or why this debate might be very difficult to win. So while you certainly have an edge in scientific facts, the intelligent design activist is quite likely a better debater than you. Biologists spend time in their lab doing research, talking to strictly scientific audiences. Intelligent design think tanks, like the Discovery Institute, have spent the past 15 years developing the most effective tactics to convince people that intelligent design is legitimate. Intelligent design focuses not on science, but on schools and on polls, on creating a theory that is watered down for mainstream consumption and that unfortunately many people find persuasive. They're going to be really good at going out and convincing a lay audience that they're right, and the scientist unfortunately does not likely have the same ability. We believe that furthermore, intelligent design isn't really a theory beyond the idea that God guided evolution. The body of knowledge that intelligent design backers have amassed amounts to sort of holes or misunderstandings in evolutionary theory. They're going to have a lot to opt, but you won't have anything of theirs to attack. That's really bad. The final point we like to make is the problem of having sort of an audience of campus judges or lay judges. We believe and we know that evolution is a difficult and complex theory that incorporates elements of chemistry, geology, archaeology, biology, etc. Intelligent design, on the other hand, has been crafted by focus groups to be easily understood by as many people as possible. Consider a stock intelligent design claim. The idea that sort of the bacterial flagellum is so complex that it couldn't have been evolved on its own because it requires over 30 proteins to function simultaneously. Scientists have demonstrated that if one is removed, the entire thing doesn't work. The answer to that common claim requires a fundamental knowledge of genetics, cell biology, the workings of an ATPase protein, the workings of an ion channel. It's just incredibly complex for a regular person to be asked to understand. Is anyone in the audience going to understand what we're talking about? No. Refuse to debate. Take a stand for science. Thank you.
Thank the Prime Minister for his eloquent remarks and call upon the Leader of Opposition to deliver the next constructive speech not to exceed 8 minutes. Hear, hear.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, everyone in this round. It really is an honor to be standing up here in front of this ridiculously august house, to be debating a great friend, and to have my partner, who's been amazing all year, he will give a great speech to follow me. But standing here in front of an auditorium full of MIT students, faculty, and neighbors, I'm intrigued by the last comments we hear from Jason, because he says that you're going to be standing up in this auditorium debating, and no one in the audience will know what you're talking about. Now, if I were out there in front of the MIT community, I would be pretty offended. Because I'd like to think, first of all, that you guys are not only pretty intelligent, but pretty intelligent when it comes to science and understanding the complicated things that I didn't understand Jason's saying, but that the average MIT member might. But here's the thing. We recognize that you're going to have some people that understand what you're talking about, and probably some people that won't. So what we want to say about the audience is that you as a scientist have an obligation not just to science, but to the entire community as a whole, and to respect the fact that some people don't like science, and may want to see a debate as to whether or not science versus other methods is actually the way that they want to go. So we think the very nature of the audience you're going to have actually supports the notion that this discourse is valuable, both for the scientists that are likely to believe you and those who are undecided who want to hear a scientist's perspective. So with that being said, I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about the value of the discourse, and I want to talk about the value of intelligent design specifically. So first, let's talk about the value of discourse. Because we think that discourse is generally valuable because it enlightens us. We think that we learn new things, gain new perspectives, and ultimately we think the value of debate is that it has the potential to change minds. That when you're exposed to a new idea, a new perspective, a new argument, you may change your own deeply held belief. You may come to look at something from a new perspective, from a new angle. So why is that important? Because it means even if you buy into their notion that you have to win this debate, and I don't think they've ever shown you why you have to win this debate to sign up for it, but even if you buy into that notion, that all we have to show is that you change more minds by engaging in the debate than by not showing up. And we think that you're absolutely more likely to change more minds in the debate. First of all, eviscerating any doubt of those who are even slightly inclined to believe in science, explaining to those who are question whether or not the scientific method is appropriate, why it is appropriate, and at least ingraining in their mind that while they may believe in intelligent design, it certainly isn't science. I think that what he tries to say, the logical fallacy that Jason makes, is that because it's hard to explain the science of evolution exactly, you're going to have a very hard time convincing a lay audience that evolution is within the realm of science. And that's absolutely not true. All you have to show that it's in the realm of science is to show everything that he says, that intelligent design isn't falsifiable, that it isn't observable, and thus you need to let the scientists talk about it. If you convince even a couple of people in the audience of that, we think you're very likely to have changed minds. His way of saying you're going to change minds on their side of the house is by not showing up for the debate, and thus by not giving credibility to the theory of intelligent design. But you, as one scientist, not showing up for one debate, first of all, probably doesn't change very many minds on the margin in terms of keeping people in the evolution camp. And if anything, for those undecided between the two camps, it increases the likelihood that they don't think you can back up your findings, that they don't think you can back up your theory, and that you can't stand up for your fundamental beliefs. We think you send exactly the wrong message. The last thing that I want to talk about under the notion of the value of discourse is why it doesn't matter if you win or lose. Because ultimately, you as a scientist believe that in the pursuit of knowledge, we are all enlightened. And that sometimes, things go your way and sometimes they don't. And we think that when you're up there in front of a community of people that have come to see you, that are interested in the discussion, you can't help but increase the aggregate level of knowledge among them. Even if that's not in your ultimate interest, that's not your choice to make. You are here debating in order to enlighten them and to give them a new perspective. If you don't like the outcome of that, if you don't like the perspective they walk away with, that's tough, but there's still value in that debate, value in that discourse, value that these individuals have attained. The second thing I want to talk about then is the value of intelligent design. Because we think that while intelligent design is not a scientific theory, for all of the reasons that they say, we think that there's value in the arguments that would be presented in a debate regarding evolution versus intelligent design. First of all, the fact that this guy is at least a scientist, we clarify that he's a scientist, means he's probably going to try and employ some aspects of science to back it up. Now this may be things like holes in the fossil record, or other things that question evolution. And we think there's value in the public understanding the limits of scientific theory. Just because the scientific community as a whole, believes very strongly in evolution, that doesn't mean that the average member of the public needs to believe that strongly in it either, or that they shouldn't at least be exposed to the questions of it. Even if you don't think those questions fall within the legitimate realm of scientific discourse, it's still important for the public to understand why certain people have chosen to question them, why they have sometimes gone outside of the scientific realm to question them. There may be a lot of religious individuals who come here who are interested to see the intersection between science and religion. For them, this may be a debate that says, well, how much is my faith consistent with science? And we think that the intelligent design scientists, while not providing an argument that's necessarily within the scientific method, may give you reason to believe that religion is at least consistent with the science that we know of today, and that there is value in that for people of faith. So we think there is a lot of intellectual value in talking about intelligent design. But ultimately, the last thing I want to make under this point is the notion that, again, you can absolutely disprove that intelligent design is within the scientific realm if you're up here debating the guy. You cannot in any way do that if you refuse to show up. This guy isn't going to engage in a back and forth with you in a peer-reviewed journal. He only wants you to debate up here. They said, well, he's really practiced and persuasive. Like, hire me and I'll give you some rhetoric classes beforehand. Seriously, like, you can prepare for this debate too. You don't have to make very sciencey arguments. All you need to do is make very clear why the arguments that this guy is making are not going to be the type of arguments that would convince a scientist. And I think that will do a lot to convince a very, very intelligent, stuff up, community of MIT faculty, students, and other friends. That being said, let's go case study. The first thing that we get is the notion of debating intelligent design legitimizing it. Because it's not a science, you can't observe it, it's not falsifiable. I mean, yes, all of these things about it not being a science are absolutely true. But guess what? If you get up to debate it, that doesn't necessarily legitimize it any more than debating like a ridiculous, that's like saying debating someone that believes in something that we find horribly immoral actually legitimizes the immoral action. We absolutely believe on our side of the house that the remedy to be applied is always more speech and not enforced silence, particularly when the average person that's having issues deciding between intelligent design and evolution is not going to be the person that reads these scientific journals. This is probably one of the only venues by which the average citizen is going to be able to access this type of information. And we think it's very easy to show, like Jason Stelter so eloquently did, why the realm of intelligent design does not fall within the realm of science. They just say, they give more reasons why, like specifically intelligent design isn't science, and we absolutely agree, and we think you should make those points in the debate. They say there's no controversy over intelligent design versus evolution in science, and that it legitimizes it to the point that it will be used in school textbooks. First of all, I don't think this one debate is in any way the tipping point that makes it all of a sudden used throughout school textbooks, particularly when the people that write these textbooks do have a scientific background and are seeing that from the realm of legitimate science. You're clearly in the right. The second point here is the notion of the correct form. And that's the idea of peer-reviewed journals, where you have back and forth over lengthy debates, and that you can't refute the arguments this guy's going to make. I think I've clearly demonstrated how you can refute those arguments, how you can refute them on the basis that they're not science, and that you probably can even use some science if you've prepared ahead of time, done any kind of research to simplify it and to explain to these people why you're right. Finally, they just say you'll lose. They say, these other guys have spent years developing persuasive tactics. Spend some time developing them yourself. Look at what these institutes have put out, because it's certainly publicly available. And even if you lose, you've still done a service to your community and to the community at large. We beg to oppose.
Here.
Thanks, everyone. I'm very honored to be here once again. I think there's no better place for me to be giving the last speech I'll give on that. That said, though, I want to begin with a bit of an observation about some of the enormous concessions we heard from the leader of opposition speech. Because what he said, time and again, he said, it doesn't matter if you're going to lose. The problem with this is there are two strands to the intelligent design propaganda. The first is that they're right about everything. So maybe you might be able to challenge that. But the second thing is that even if they're not clearly winning the debate, you should teach the controversy. So if you end up not winning the debate, then ultimately it looks like there's a legitimate controversy that should be fought. The problem with this is that the scientific community doesn't believe there's a controversy. They roundly assert that there is no controversy, that this theory has no legitimate scientific value. Ultimately, debating them, if you're likely to lose, is a huge problem. Moreover, you have to completely face crush them in order for you to actually gain any sort of efficacy, because you have to demolish the second line of propaganda that there's no controversy and no one could reasonably believe the sorts of theories that he's advocating. That, we think, is an impossibly high one for you to do, and we think that's why there's absolutely no benefit to be gained for you engaging in this particular form of debate. But the other thing I want to say to this is there's another big structural flaw with the entirety of their advocacy, which is that intelligent design advocates are intellectually dishonest, because they do portray their thing as a scientific theory. They do pretend like they have positive evidence, and it's very hard to explain why these sorts of scientific norms are the ones that exclude their theory, but include the other sorts of theories. Moreover, we know they're intellectually dishonest because in the recent Pennsylvania case, they literally took a creationist textbook, took out the word creator in every instance it appeared, and replaced it with the word intelligent designer. These people are willing to cheat to win, and they take classes to convince people. That ultimately, we think, is something that's going to be very difficult for you to do. We don't think you gain any advantage or any traction at all from doing this sort of thing, and that's a huge problem. So let's look to the first thing he says, which I actually think is sort of interesting, because he says, scientists can understand complex things, and since you're at MIT, everyone will understand everything, right? Now, I don't know that much about MIT, but I'm fairly certain it's not composed entirely of evolutionary biologists, right? There are some people who study things like linguistics and philosophy, who might not be be able to understand the sort of relatively complex evolutionary biological things that you need to explain in order to explain evolution. Because this is another point that Baer just completely misunderstands, that the sorts of things you need to actually debunk intelligent design are very complex and are usually really only well understood at a relatively high level. So I don't think these people are going to be all that easily expressible in just a 45-minute debate round. Moreover, though, I don't think that there's clearly any benefit here, right? If the audience is sort of bifurcated between like a bunch of evolutionary biologists who probably already think intelligent design is just a bunch of hooey, and a bunch of people who have just come in from the community and whatnot, then you're ultimately just going to confuse the lay people by making it seem like intelligent design is legitimate and not gaining any traction with the evolutionary biologists. No. So I don't think there's any clear benefit to doing this sort of thing. Now, what they say next under this I find very interesting, because they say you have an obligation to society to make sure that the correct theories are being told, right? The big problem with this is that society right now seems very susceptible to the second line of propaganda, which is that there is a reasonable controversy, so we treat the controversy to students. That's the last thing that we want. Because the last thing that we want is to think that people in public high schools are being taught that there's a legitimate alternative to the evolutionary theory. I think that's a big problem. And your obligation to society should point you in the opposite direction. Now, what's the first argument they give us? Well, they give us that there are lots of benefits to having this sort of discourse, right? And that you can easily beat him, right? It's sort of the major argument under here, right? There are problems with this. Firstly, there are lots of things we don't know. Like, it's very difficult to explain how consciousness evolved. And there are lots of gaps in the fossil record which aren't very easy to explain. So that's a big problem. Moreover, though, it's easy for the intelligent design to cast out than it is for you to sort of build and defend a positive theory, right? Because his goal is that, well, listen, if evolution isn't the correct theory, then what the hell else could have happened? What else could possibly be the alternative? There must be an intelligent designer, right? It's in the theory of God in the gaps. Since evolution doesn't explain everything, some other legitimate alternative must, right? So he doesn't have to prove this sort of positive theory. No, thank you. Moreover, though, I would say that it can often appear to have positive evidence for his claim, right? Because it can point to the complexity of things and say, listen, this is empirically observable evidence. It's obviously complete BS, but he can point to it and it looks like he's meeting the goals of science. Furthermore, though, he can often contest the sorts of norms of science. Intelligent designers are famous for saying these norms are just sort of gross aspects of the ivory tower issues of science and that they're just bland and atheistic. These are the sorts of things that are very difficult to disprove in a 45-minute debate round, and these are things he can legitimately contest. My third response here is that I think that it's ultimately too broad a standard, right? Because there's clearly some things we don't think are worth talking about, right? It's clearly the fact that some people disagree about whether or not there was a moon landing, or the fact that David Duke thinks that it's still okay to be racist, doesn't mean that we should give them platforms and engage with them at universities. There's no clear standard to any of his arguments. No, you had your chance as to why we should be able to exclude these sorts of people and why we should be forced to engage with debate on people whose theories we think are just as illegitimate. But the next thing I would say under this is that I think it's very important to maintain the correct forum, because I think you can actually turn the debate on its head and say to the intelligent designer, you are the ones that are afraid, you are the ones that are not afraid of engaging us, where ultimately all scientific theories have been accepted, right? There's lots of completely controversial scientific theories that have been accepted in the past. A great example of this is Alfred Wegener, right? He proposed the theory of continental drift when he was like 80 years old, and everyone at the time thought he was completely nuts. What did he do? Well, I'll tell you what he didn't do. He didn't go around challenging people to debates or insisting that the controversy be taught in public high schools. Instead, for 10 years, he collected data, published articles, and afterwards, people in the scientific community realized that he was right, even though they thought he was initially crazy. Intelligent designers don't do this sort of thing. You should say, you should do this sort of thing if you want us to engage with your theory on a legitimate ground. Sure.
Why don't you point out in this debate that the way these normal scientific discourses happen is through journal articles, and question him as to why he or any of his followers have never written a journal article?
Right. The problem is that he's not just so firstly, they challenge these sorts of norms all the time and say that journal articles are just filled with lots of atheist propaganda and that we aren't comfortable engaging these sorts of things. Moreover, though, I think it's very clear that debating him, and the reason you don't want to do it, gives a great degree of legitimacy to this fora as a means for discussing legitimate scientific theories. Ultimately, I just don't think it's practical for you to get up for 45 minutes and say, no, trust me, it's not a legitimate scientific theory. I don't think that's the sort of argument that's going to have a lot of sway. Finally, I would say that there's lots of really complex issues that you may have to discuss. It's very difficult for you to do these sorts of things. They say next on the end of this that there are limits of the theory, and this is important to discuss, right? So firstly, it's not at all clear how the limits of the theory are something that you need to express or that you need to talk to specifically when you think that the alternative doesn't have any particular value. Moreover, though, we think you're very much worried about how the fact of reasonable controversy might look, and particularly if kids in schools are being cultured into this sort of thing. But I will also say, under this argument, that they learn so you can be practiced and persuasive and you can debate these sorts of things. There are a couple of problems with this. Firstly, the intelligent design advocate, literally, it's his job to be practiced and persuasive, whereas it's your job to do far more important things, arguments, like actually research evolutionary biology. Moreover though, the sort of complex arguments that are winning arguments for the evolutionary biologist don't make a whole lot of sense to us normal philosophy majors, right? When the winning argument for him is like, oh look, the APDA domain acquired this sort of activity, and that was what really sort of proved that there was evolution. That argument makes no sense to me, right? But it's a winning argument. It's totally the killer rock for the evolutionary biologists, right? So that's a big problem. And ultimately, though, it's these sciencey arguments that are the real reason why intelligent design is false. And it's not the reason, that's not the sort of thing that can easily be expressed in a debate to people who aren't familiar with that sort of thing. So let's turn case study, because it really just misses a lot here. I think that's a big problem. So we first talk about how debating is going to legitimize the activity, because it's not a science, but a religious ideology. And they say, well, we wouldn't be legitimizing something if it was incredibly immoral, right? This would be an argument for LSU getting a platform that David Duke, or for Columbia sort of like not having to preface their speech, their sort of forum with identity job by saying like, look, we really don't endorse these views. Why do they have to preface that sort of thing if it didn't appear that giving them a forum to speak endorsed and legitimated the views which they don't think are legitimate, right? That's a huge problem for their side of the house. I think they're losing on that. We also talk about how because these things aren't empirically observable or falsifiable, they're not theories. And by debating them, this is the key argument. You're committing the fallacy of false equivalence. You're pretending for the purpose of the debate round, and I'm sure the intelligent designer will close with this argument that it looks like it's an equivalent empirical theory, and that's a big problem. We also talk about how it's important to limit this sort of thing to the correct form. We don't hear any real response to this because the scientific debate is not conducive to apostolate. Finally, we talk about how he's going to be a much better debater for you, how it's going to be very difficult to explain these sorts of things. You're going to lose this debate, and you get no benefit from engaging these resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a great pleasure to be debating in this round of the finals of MIT Nationals, particularly my father as an evolutionary biologist. Now, with that said, I think they make two intriguing assumptions today that they ultimately never justify, and I think they're really very wrong about. The first is that you need to win this debate. I think that as individuals who have competed in debate and have dealt with this notion of competitive debate, it's very easy for us to fall back on this construct. But Michael and I very much challenge the notion that you have to debate to win. We think that the overall notion of debate is to explore my ideas and to get the audience to be more informed. At the end of the day, what Michael argues for you today is that by showing up, you're presenting your argument to individuals. You can never control whether or not they're going to reject you. But what can you control? That these individuals have heard you, ergo they are now more informed. And I think that's one of the things. But moreover, they seem to have this standard that you should only debate if you can get up there and sort of prove that intelligent design is not true. But I think this is a really important point, because science can never disprove the existence of God. Because what we ultimately recognize is that there are intelligent design theorists out there who absolutely believe that evolution is true, for instance, but it happens to be completely guided by God. That means that the goal of this debate is not to disprove intelligent design, but to merely prove that intelligent design and evolution are two very different enterprises. And insofar as one is science and one is religion, we don't have to convince anyone to give up their religion, but merely to recognize, perhaps in the best case scenario, that they are different, that science should only restrain itself to one of these enterprises, and that at the end of the day, if the best things happen, that we think that only science ought to be taught in school and not religion. That's what we have to win. We don't have to teach people, I think, that you have to necessarily reject your view. And you can do this by informing people. This doesn't involve complex evolutionary arguments. The next notion that we get there is that, look, you're legitimizing this because you're taking a scientific debate into the public forum. But here's precisely the point. The scientific debate on this is largely resolved. What is the problem in the controversy between evolution and intelligent design? That the public has not accepted the consensus of the scientists. What does that mean? We think that at the point where they're concerned that individuals in the communities are going to choose to elect to have textbooks that are written by evolutionary design scientists versus people who support intelligent design, you can't win that debate in journals because it's the question of who wrote the textbook. It's the public that gets to decide which textbook they purchase, which means that the only way you can engage them is in a public forum, which means that the only way you can change their minds on this is not by convincing them that religion is not true, because you can never convince people of that based on science, but that religion and science are distinct, and that is an argument that you can certainly make, and an argument that we believe you can stand up and obviously defend.
Anish, I'm really confused. Why do you have to just publish your views solely in scientific journals? Why the fact that you don't debate this means that you can never express your views in any other method, like in an editorial or something like that?
If you're true, then if everything you're saying, that like, if they respond to you in a public forum, then it legitimizes them. What happens next week when they run into it? All the harm is done. New York Times is not peer review. Hate to break it to you guys. Yeah, expect knowledge from a dad, maybe. Now, this is why we don't get magazines. Now, what do they tell you about this? First, these people are dirty, dirty people. Anyone who believes in intelligent design ought not be debated with, and these people ought not be trusted. This is precisely why this debate needs to happen, and why this dialogue needs to happen. Why? Because we think that for too long, scientists have been standing in their ivory tower saying, yes, we have resolved this and we understand this, but have said and demonized the other side. Notice that in case construct, they never said, this is a swarming individual. They have said, this is an individual who disagrees with you. While one implies the other is not clear. And we think that at the fact that both of these sides have refused to engage each other in any legitimate dialogue, the fact that he wants to come here, you shouldn't necessarily ascribe the worst of motives to him, but understand that he may want to just talk about this issue. Moreover, they talk about the notion that, look, you can't really prove evolution this time. Perhaps not. But what can you say? You can say that 99% of scientists believe that the theory of evolution is true, which automatically builds in consensus, which means you don't fall into the false consensus trap by saying that just by debating them, it seems like there's a 50-50 split on this. But here's what else you can do. You can be like, there's also many questions at stake here. There's the question of, well, is evolution true or not? But as audience members coming to this forum, you think you're also going to be asking questions like, well, what role should evolution play in what I believe in life? And what role can it not function for me? At the point where many people think, well, if I believe in evolution, I can't think that there is a God. I can't think that life has a purpose. I think this evolutionary biologist can say, absolutely not. They're two completely different spheres of your life. And we are going to focus on the science, because ultimately, what science does is to the empirical. And here's why it's very important to understand that you can concede that there are gaps in your theory. Because absolutely, any scientific theory can never be proven, it can only be disproven, which means there are still gaps. Why can you acknowledge this? You can say, look, these are gaps in the theory. But the reason we have jobs as professors is because we're not allowed to say it's God. We're allowed to say that, look, there's going to be some sort of other mechanism here, and that's our job to look for this mechanism. If you want to believe something else, that's fine. All you have to show is that science is distinct. Why is this important? We think this is important because it fundamentally shows that the scientific process has never been a system that involves having an absolute proof for something. You can go through all sorts of examples of physics, for instance, theories of everything, like quaternion forces, which are thought to exist at some time, but then they're disproved, and these gaps are filled in. You can reference this to show, look, we think that we're going to fill in these gaps, but just because there are gaps doesn't mean that there has to be religion, but there can still be religion. It's just that we're not going to be advocating for it because that's not what scientists do. They said that, look, the audience isn't going to understand it. Well, the audience understands the scientific method, so they may not understand everything about organic chemistry, everything about every particular subject, but if they understand the scientific method, the argument that we hear in the first speech is an argument that can be made. Second, they talk about the notion that, look, the real way to do it is via science. Even then, just right now, by asking the editorial question, recognize that they don't really accept the standard. Next, they talk about the notion that you shouldn't expose your faults. Why? I think a lot of the disbelief of science comes from the fact that, science thinks that they're complete know-it-alls who have a complete theory of what your life ought to be. I think that by providing a more reasonable face on what science is, people are going to be much more willing to engage in the dialogue. And that's what we think we win, if they engage in the dialogue. If you give the reasonable face that, look, we don't have all the answers, but gosh, why aren't we going to keep on looking, and we're going to keep on looking in a way that looks only empirical, because it's worked in the past, it could yield great things for society, you can believe whatever you want to, these are distinct enterprises. We think that is the message we want to send out there, and that is the message that can be successful. Finally, they say that, look, he can be more persuasive than you. His message is fine-tuned to appeal. First of all, you're an MIT professor. You teach, which means you have to convey information on a daily basis. We think you're pretty good at taking complex arguments and explaining it to lay people. If you teach an introduction to evolutionary biology class, for instance, you have people who understand the scientific method, precisely your audience. And moreover, Michael Baird is always available for lessons. We don't ultimately believe that this is the reason not to engage in this debate. Next then, going back to case study, essentially what they give us here is the notion that work. If you engage in this debate, why wouldn't you engage everyone in a debate? Why wouldn't you engage with the Ku Klux Klan? Why wouldn't you engage with all these horrible people? Well, first of all, we think that there might be forums in which that might be appropriate, because they never said we couldn't put a preface in our debate, putting all the scientific facts out there, that 99% of scientists think this is true, that it's largely a social construct, or largely a social decision. We think that that can very much happen. But we also think that the magnitude to which a debate needs to occur is the magnitude to which the public is interested in it. And ultimately, we think that if the public wants such a debate to be there, and they want to understand more about these two issues, and want to understand more in a way that's accessible to them, but not just in a peer journal, then I think you as a scientist have an obligation to be there, particularly when your ergo competitor has been in this forum. The public wants to know more about you. They know plenty about the other side. We think that you have an obligation to show up and share your opinions. We ultimately think that you can draw the distinction between science and religion. You can show that science doesn't have to disprove God, but it's simply a different enterprise, and a lot of people will be more persuaded than if you never show up. It is a pride of the approach.
Thank the member of opposition for his eloquent remarks. Recall the leader of opposition to deliver the first result. So here's something for those of you who haven't seen the debate before. We have people who aren't debaters in these speeches. Is there anyone who would like to give a speech to the government side? There's one. Is there anyone who would like to give a speech to the opposition? I'm sorry. Yeah, I just want to make sure we have speeches for both sides. Yeah. Okay, so you have a speech for Gov? Yeah. Go for it.
Okay, so I only prepped out sort of like one really argument, and I don't have a whole lot of jokes, but indeed really any joke at all, except to say that this is the one time I think in my entire life I've given a floor. God knows, but you know, certainly I'm pleased to be able to say that finally I do agree with Princeton, because I think that Stanford asking you to believe just a really incoherent point about the audience thing, right? So they say, look, you're at MIT, everyone will understand what you're talking about. Okay, so if that's true, that means that everyone has the background necessary to understand the scientific evidence you'll be proposing, in which case they already believe you. So the problem is that anyone who is at all confused on the issue, doesn't have that information, won't understand your evidence, and is particularly vulnerable to the kind of trickery that the guy that Stanford wants to talk is going to be using to explain, right? So the fact is that at any time that there's any doubt about anyone in the audience, the intelligent design guy is always going to win. And Stanford can't just say that everyone from MIT is a genius. I'm not in finals. I know that's not true.
First off, let me say that I'm as surprised as you are that I'm giving this speech. Thank you, guys. I think this is going to be worth it just for the sheer look of terror in Michelle Zimmerman's face right now. I want to start off and say I'm really disappointed in Princeton because I really thought they were going to give vegetarianism another go. This could have been the year, guys. And if you didn't pick it up, they would have come back next year to your tournament and run it again and again until someone please vote for this case. But I think they did make a crucial mistake in case selection by running something so much about science. First off, at a place like MIT, this small liberal arts college filled with nothing but philosophy majors. But also, and I don't want to play on stereotypes, but Anish is on that team. Were you hoping that his father was a computer scientist? Let's be honest. All right, a little racy. But I also think that there was an interesting thing that Jason said. He basically made the assertion that you're a scientist at MIT. There is no way you could be good at debate. Well, we just got 2 votes on the panel for Stanford. But correct me if I'm wrong. Jason, aren't you going to a PhD program for biology? Scientists are bad. Like, you're losing, but you're not that bad of a debater, Jason. And that hope, ladies and gentlemen, lies right there in the master of rhetoric, the person that you must hire if you're going to have any success in this world, Michael Bayer. And I think Michael Bayer provides an excellent example of why we need to have this debate about intelligent design and why the intelligent design theorist might be right. Because if you listen to that silky smooth voice, look at that perfectly floppy hair, that winning grin that he gives whenever he asks a POI, you know that it is no accident that Michael Bayer is here. There is a spark of the divine in this, the hottest man on APDA.
You got a couple more years to go. No.
and they basically consist of 8 minutes of jokes about this guy. So it's not an inside joke now when I say that I feel really strange giving a course speech without inside jokes. But I actually have a serious question for an avowed global case. This is sort of a difficult thing to say. But I wonder why it is that we should be disputing intelligent design, why we shouldn't just sort of live in that minute, right? And the idea that I have is this idea that there are truths and then there are personal truths, and that these things are different. That there are things that are true in the world. Things that are true in the world include evolution happening. Personal truths are things that are true to me or true to you. For me, it is personally true and an undeniable truth that there is no God. For other individuals, it's sort of exactly the opposite remains to be a personal truth. And I think it's important that we look to those personal truths and use them as a means of getting closer to the things that we understand to be universal truths. And what we need to understand about intelligent design and the belief in intelligent design is that there are two kinds of people who buy into it. People who ultimately buy into it and believe it to be intelligent design and creation design. But also people who buy into objects around. This idea of intelligent design coexists and cohabitates with evolution, where it just started evolution. And I think it's valuable to use those individuals' personal truth of intelligent design to move them towards the greater and truer truth of evolution. I think that that's where the debate comes by. And even though this is really more of a speaker off, I just want to talk about that idea, Joe. I think it's interesting. I don't really know my conclusion. Johnny, you're going to be fine.
So I'm not gonna do what everybody thinks I'm gonna do. There will not be any jokes in this speech about rape, abortion, abortion after rape, or Matt Spots' mom. None of that. But I think this is sort of interesting. I think it's sort of interesting. Both of these teams are sort of fulfilling their roles. It seems very natural. In that, you know, we've got the team from Stanford here, APDA West, and they're just like, yeah, man, you should probably let them debate. And you've got the Princeton team is like, no, you should not. They are wrong. And these are sort of like violent fulfilling the roles, and I'm not going to say either one of them's wrong. But I was thinking, and I was talking to Andy about some other sort of ludicrous requests that could possibly be made. What other sort of refusals ought to be made for sort of, people on the fringes? Such as a professor of Shakespeare should probably refuse the town fool. An African-American studies professor should refuse the, Republican candidate to debate. And a women's studies professor should probably refuse to talk to me. So, we talked a little bit about how Michael Baer here, who I've just recently met and found to be wonderful here, that he's giving lessons in sort of, speech theory, things like this. And I'm going to ask the question, which I think all the ladies and some of the guys here are asking is, are these lessons private? So, the last thing I want to talk to you about is something I hold very near and dear to my heart, something I think is important, something that I don't think is talked about enough in APDA debate rounds when we're talking about personal decision making, and that's justifying your thug. This man is standing on the corner calling out your name. You have to justify.
Now call upon the leader of opposition to deliver the first rebuttal speech of the round, not to exceed 4 minutes. You're here.
Thanks so much, Mr. Speaker, everyone. I think it's been a really interesting round. Guys, thanks for the case. I think it's fantastic. I want to start, though, by observing what I think they try and pigeonhole us into in this debate. Because they say, oh, you can accept whether or not you're going to have this debate. And then they kind of tell you exactly how this debate is going to go, kind of denying your free will to do certain things in this debate. I want to expose some of those assumptions before I get into my crystallization. First, that you have to beat intelligent design. We don't think you have to conclusively scientifically prove that evolution is absolutely right and there is no scientific chance at all that the evidence that they're presenting, might be believable. You just need to show that intelligent design, the way the theory exists, does not belong in the realm of science. Those are two very different things that you have to prove. Second, that they seem that the audience is not going to be able to grasp the science here. And some of them may not be able to grasp all of the nitty-gritty details of the science, but I think everyone in this room is walking away thinking that intelligent design is not science. That's because they articulated very eloquently why it wasn't. I think anyone of average intelligence can probably grasp those arguments too. Fine, especially an MIT audience. Fine, next they said, they basically assumed that you need to make bad arguments. That you need to make the arguments that like they try and say you're going to make. Like you need to be bogged down in the nitty-gritty of the science. We absolutely don't think you have to do that. You can do what's persuasive too. The last assumption that they make is that you can't preface this debate with a, I'm not legitimizing this as science, but recognize that this is an important issue to discuss. They use the Ahmadinejad example. You're the scientist, make the same opening. Say that you're out here to convince the community, or to even just talk with the community about your position and hope that they walk away enlightened. I think all of those assumptions demonstrate why this debate will go very differently from how they envision it. That being said, 3 questions. First.
A point of order. I actually think the specific response to the Ahmadinejad example that you can give the same opening about how you don't endorse these views is a new response to an argument I made the other day.
No, it's under consideration. I will say though that Anish did. I would say that Anish did very explicitly say that you can say different things in this debate. That you can say whatever you want, and this is an example of that. First question. Thank you. Where does the debate between intelligent design and evolution matter? It doesn't matter in the scientific community, because that's already been settled. It matters in society at large. It matters where people are grappling with the notion of science versus religion and understanding where and how to draw the line. Those are exactly the people that are likely to show up to this debate, that are going to be informed. We think that you can make very clear where science ends, what it can explain, and also what it can't explain. That science will never claim to be able to prove or disprove the existence of God, and that's simply outside the realm of what we as scientists, or you as scientists, have the capacity to demonstrate. We think that's very meaningful for this audience, for these group of individuals who have come out to hear you speak. The second question is, do you have to win this debate? And I think we very clearly won that the answer to that is no. That these people are not all scientists, and it is their right not to agree with you. It's their right to, at the end of the day, want to believe in something other than science, to want to disagree with the scientific method. So what do you want to do though? You want to give them the tools with which to make that choice. You want to say, here's all the information I can provide you about how science operates and whether or not it interacts well with religion, whether or not it interacts well with intelligent design. And then I want you to go be informed and make these choices. How do we know that individuals are hungry for this information? Anish tells you that the people in communities that are deciding about whether their textbook is going to have evolution or intelligent design are looking for this information. They even implicitly admit this when they say you should write an editorial to the New York Times where you can just as easily be engaged in the same exact type of debate. I think it's clear that people want to be exposed to both perspectives. I think you have an obligation as someone who represents one perspective but who can't objectively claim a hold on the truth to give the audience that choice and then to let them decide. Finally then, will you improve understanding by engaging in this debate? And I think the answer is yes. You can draw very clear distinctions between science and religion. You can point out where science ends. You can deal with all of their trickery that they try and say. Like, they make it very clear why the trickery examples that they give are so treacherous and are so deceptive. Say exactly what they say about these treacherous examples in the debate, and you can very easily disprove it. You can say that 99% of scientists believe that evolution is true. You can get your viewpoint out there, and you can interact with theirs. We think that's the ultimate value of discourse. We think the community wants that information. We think you should provide it, and that's why we oppose.
The opposition now recall the Prime Minister to deliver the final speech of the round.
Here.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sad to say that this is going to be my last speech on the circuit, but wow, what an amazing ride it's been. Thank you, class. Thank you, everyone. 2 points of crystallization as to why